You haven't done it in 30 years or 26 years.
Well,
any number you
I've
want to
been
do.
a senator,
You
Donald,
haven't done it.
and
You haven't
I
done
have
it.
been a
And
Secretary of State, and I have
Your
done
husband signed
a lot.
NAFTA, which was one of the worst things that ever happened to the manufacturing industry.
That is your opinion.
You go to New England, you go to Ohio, Pennsylvania, you go anywhere you want, Secretary Clinton, and you will see devastation where manufacturing is down 30, 40, sometimes 50%. NAFTA is the worst trade deal maybe ever signed anywhere, but certainly ever signed in this country.
You might have heard of Nafta, also known as the North American Free Trade Agreement. It was the first agreement of its kind and still makes the world's biggest free trade area. So, just what is it? Well, let's begin with the basics. First, it includes Canada, the US, and Mexico. It was proposed in 1992 by these guys, and it was extremely controversial. Critics feared massive job losses, with businesses packing up and moving production to Mexico. Supporters, though, they claimed that it would lead to cheaper goods, and that would lead to economic growth. In fact, it was so controversial that in the 1992 presidential election, a billionaire outsider presidential candidate shot to the top of the polls railing against it. Businessman Ross Perot. Sounds pretty familiar. But NAFTA won out in the end with Congress and then President Clinton ratifying it in 1993.
We are ready to compete, and we can win.
NAFTA is a large, incredibly complicated document, but at its core, it's pretty simple. Before NAFTA, when items were imported, they were taxed. After NAFTA, they weren't. This protects goods made domestically at the expense of consumers, since the tax on foreign products is passed down. Higher tariffs, more expensive goods, less trade. Free trade agreements like NAFTA remove those tariffs, incentivizing trade and lowering costs for consumers. Tariffs were greatly reduced at the start of the agreement in 1994 and totally eliminated by 2008. So what did NAFTA accomplish? It's not easy pinpointing the exact effects that NAFTA has had because there are many factors in how economies function, but since the agreement, U.S. trade amongst Mexico and Canada has tripled. The U.S. trade deficit with Canada and Mexico has increased significantly. But, according to this congressional report, NAFTA actually hasn't had that large an effect on the U.S. economy. NAFTA only increased the U.S. GDP by a few hundredths of a percent because, relative to the size of the total economy, trade with Mexico and Canada isn't that big. So the biggest question of all, how has it affected American jobs? Economists agree there's no simple answer. It's impossible to completely separate the effects NAFTA has had on the economy from other external forces like recessions, currency valuations, technological automation, and overall increases in globalization. Many U.S. manufacturing jobs have moved overseas to countries that America doesn't even have free trade agreements with, like China. Overall, domestic manufacturing has taken a spill. Trade has increased, and goods are cheaper.
I know NAFTA was a good idea. It's created millions of jobs, and it has helped the economies of all three of these nations. All you have to do is go to Detroit and see the thousands of trucks lined up every day, or go to our southern border. There have been winners and losers, and that's the problem. But free trade is something I think that's vital to the future of America. As a free trader, I will open up every market in the world to Iowa agricultural products. Have people lost jobs? Yes, they have, and they're going to lose jobs, although the overall gain in jobs has been pretty impressive. But we can't leave anybody behind. We cannot leave people behind because of being displaced workers, and I am committed to implementing training and education programs that works through our community colleges, which are very strong in Iowa, and tailor and implement training and education programs for the local needs so that we can have people fill jobs and not be left behind at a very early stage of their life, including, if necessary, someone who had a high-paying job that's required to take a much lower-paying job to have a level of compensation so that they wouldn't experience that dramatic change in their income.
Well, of course it was a bad idea. It was a bad idea because NAFTA was written specifically to drive down wages. I mean, Ross Perot was right. When he warned America that we were going to lose millions of jobs, he was 100% right. He knew what the Democrats at that point weren't ready to say, and that is that NAFTA was going to cause America to lose millions of jobs because wages would, because manufacturers, corporations would seek other countries where wages were lower, where workers didn't have any rights at all, where they could make a bigger profit. Now, let's think about this for a minute. It was a Democratic president who passed NAFTA, President Clinton. When he passed that, the Democrats lost the Congress in the next election. Why? Because people just lost confidence that Democrats would protect their wages and protect their jobs. In this election, you have many people running for president who voted for NAFTA or who supported NAFTA. And now, I wasn't in the Congress, but I made my position very clear right from the beginning that there should be no trade agreements unless they include workers' rights, human rights, environmental quality principles. Let's look at where we are right now. We've lost millions of jobs to NAFTA. We're losing millions more due to China trade. And as president, my first act in office will be to cancel NAFTA and get out of the WTO and to have trade that are based on those workers' rights principles plus protection of the air and the water and the land, environmental principles, plus prohibitions on child labor, trade labor, or slave labor and prison labor. So I offer that to you for your consideration because trade is one of those areas where the Democratic Party has absolutely failed the American people, sold them out. And I'm the one Democrat who understands that workers need a president who isn't going to be mourning while there's grass growing in parking lots where they used to grow, where they used to make steel, cars, washing machines, bicycles, automotive supplies, and now there's grass growing in parking lots.